I remember when I first saw Back to the Future, and that was actually in 1985 in a little cinema in the hometown where I grew up in Austria, with a really bad Austrian or German dubbing. And so most of the films that we saw in Austria were dubbed. And I still can't believe what a strange, stupid voice poor Mr. Fox has in Austria. So like all this like horrible dubbing. So like I try to avoid any kind of dub film if possible. I'd rather watch it with subtitles. But in Austria, sometimes it was really hard to see the original films because there are, I don't know, like 80 million German-speaking people in Switzerland, Germany, Austria. And so there is a huge industry in dubbing films. And that's why it's strange, because if you compare like Scandinavia and the German-speaking countries, we have exactly the same school system concerning all of us start learning English very early on, etc. But all the German speakers always have a strange dialect that doesn't really sound good. Although they speak good English, it sounds weird. And that is really because in Scandinavia, all the films are subtitled and you hear them in the original English version. And in Austria and Germany, they're all dubbed to German. So nobody really listens to English. Everyone kind of like knows English, but doesn't know how it sounds. So that's kind of weird, but that's like a non sequitur. But so I saw it in the dubbed German version, and I remember that it was kind of like the ultimate like nerd feel good movie for me.
Hello and welcome to this penultimate mini episode of The Celluloid Mirror Season 2. This is Nicole Solomon, one of your two regular hosts. I am flying solo today, and you just heard a clip from our next and final full episode of The Celluloid Mirror for the season. It is a discussion of Robert Zemeckis' 80s sci-fi comedy Back to the Future and Johannes Grenzfurthner's 2021 micro-budget cosmic horror film Masking Threshold. As you probably heard on the clip, we have a special guest for this episode, and it is Masking Threshold writer, director, and actor Johannes Grenzfurthner himself. So it is a very special episode. It's a little different from what we usually do, but I think it's a really great episode. It's one of the ones that makes me the happiest of all the ones we've done. If you are not already familiar, Masking Threshold is an excellent, disturbing, thoughtful, and for me at least, really inspiring film that I hope you will check out. It is about a rather isolated nerd in Florida who develops tinnitus that bothers him a lot. None of the doctors he goes to seem to be able to find a cause, let alone anything to remedy the situation. And so the protagonist of the film sets out to solve the mystery of his tinnitus himself. And as I told you, it's a horror film, so the results of that are, they're something. Masking Threshold will be streaming starting in October. It's being distributed by Drafthouse Films. So I think you can listen to the episode before you've seen it. That'll probably give you an idea of if it is the sort of film that you want to see or not. I've seen it a couple times, and I think it's fine to watch it if you know what happens already. I think that's just fine, in my opinion. So I hope you will listen to the episode, even if you haven't seen the film. And then once it's available streaming in October, definitely check it out. Also, I want to mention that Johannes Grenzfurthner's next feature film, Ratzennest, which is more of a horror comedy, I would say, has a lot in common with Masking Threshold, also very different in a lot of ways. It's rad. I really like it. And that's going to be at some festivals this fall as well. So keep an eye out for Ratzennest at a festival near you. Coming soon as well. Johannes is a really interesting filmmaker. Definitely check out his other work. He has a couple other documentaries and sci-fi features out there. I met him for the first time at a film festival back in 2014, and we've been pals ever since. So yeah, I'm really glad that his work is getting a bit of a wider audience now with the success of Masking Threshold, as well as the upcoming Rotson Nest. I'm imagining probably most of you are more familiar with Back to the Future, which is the other film that we will be discussing next week. We're going to be talking a lot about it in relation to Masking Threshold, talking a bit about class struggle and masculinity and the trope of the mad scientist, America's decline, all sorts of different themes we're going to be talking about in relation into these two films. And there was so much to say that, as always, there's all kinds of stuff we didn't get to at all. Like, it was kind of amazing to me when I was editing them, like, wow, we didn't even talk about some of the problematic aspects of the film, like the whole Libyan terrorists aspect, which is not my fave, personally. I think we mentioned, but didn't really get into, the whole Marty McFly invents rock and roll moment. We also barely scratched the surface of all the incesty stuff, because there's a lot to discuss in the film. There's a lot to discuss in Masking Threshold as well, and the three of us could have done a whole series on just those two films alone. But that's all to say, yeah, Back to the Future, rich text. Love the movie. Don't love everything about it. You'll hear some of the things I don't love in the episode, as well as a lot of the things that I do truly adore. You know how we do things on the Celluloid Mirror. We recognize that sometimes criticism is part of engaging with the art that you love. Speaking of art that you love, we also didn't get to everything I wanted to talk about Listomania, and especially Thor Ragnarok. If you heard our last full new episode, we had a little rerun last week, but before that we had an episode about Ken Russell's Listomania and Taika Waititi's Thor Ragnarok. And even though we talked for over 3 hours, Sean and I still didn't get to everything we intended to talk about. It is shocking to me that I barely discussed Valkyrie, who is maybe my favorite character in the entire film. I did not discuss her Pegasus. I did not discuss her armor. I did not discuss that shot where she's walking in slow motion as fireworks explode behind her. I also barely discussed Korg or his revolution. I barely discussed the Grandmaster and Sakaar society. We didn't even talk about how Thor Ragnarok has maybe the only completely successful and awesome third act in any of the, at least, last 4 phases or whatever, waves, whatever they call them, of MCU films, and why it's so good. We didn't even talk about the usage of Immigrant Song, even though the power of rock and roll was one of the commonalities that we had identified between the two films we wanted to discuss. But, that's, like I said, that's how it is with a rich text. You can definitely, email us at info@4milescircus.com, find us on social media. We're 4 Mile Circus everywhere. Or better yet, go to anchor.fm/the Celluloid Mirror and leave us a voicemail. That would be great. Or hit us up on Patreon. That would be even better. To talk about your feelings about Thor Ragnarok as well as Listomania, what we forgot to talk about, why you think it's awesome, all of that. I did want to mention that we've gotten a lot of interesting feedback on that episode. I know Sean talked about a bunch on the last mini. I had an interesting conversation with Dan Berger, whose article, The Fools of National Socialism, we discussed on that episode. I chatted with Dan a little bit, and it turns out, I didn't even know this, but he is a big Thor Ragnarok fan as well, and he had quite a journey listening to our episode, which I was shocked that he did, because Dan Berger's a busy man. He's busy doing important prison abolition work and writing books and things like that while we're, talking about Marvel movies. But it was a real journey for both of us, actually, because it turns out he did not know that I was part Norwegian until he listened to the episode. So this episode was an important moment in our friendship. I've known Dan for decades, and I was genuinely shocked he didn't know this about me. I really would have thought it would have come up, but I guess it didn't. So, we're all just getting brought together sci-fi podcasts, check out Dan Berger's article, The Fools of National Socialism, and also just like literally every book he's ever written. You want a great history about the Weather Underground? Read Outlaws of America. It is the best history of the Weathermen and the Weather Underground that I have ever read. And he has many more great books where that came from. Anyway, also please, check out your podcast platform of choice in 1 week when our final full episode with Johannes Grenzfurthner about Masking Threshold and Back to the Future drops. And then I will be back with Sean 1 week after that, 2 weeks from today, with our final mini episode to just wrap up the season before we switch to a more sporadic release schedule. Don't worry, you're not going to be rid of us that easily. We do have a lot of plans, and we will be recording some new episodes this fall that I think you're really going to enjoy. That's all happening really soon, so please keep an eye out this fall. Also keep an eye out for our horror short reveal, which will be making its way into the world very soon. You can visit our Patreon at patreon.com/4milecircus to get exclusive bonus episodes of the Celluloid Mirror, as well as generally keep up with all the things we do. Like, we have a lot of stuff we share there on our Patreon. Like I, for example, have been about once a month, I'll share a new entry in this series I've been doing called Hotlines. It's a written series in which I examine representations of phone sex workers in film. It's a pretty big project I've been working on for over a year now, where I'm perhaps foolishly trying to watch and track themes and tropes in basically every movie I can find out exists that is about phone sex workers. It's honestly pretty difficult to find any lists of films of films about phone sex workers, comprehensive or not, let alone any additional information or analysis. Not to brag, but if you are interested in such a thing, on my Letterboxd, which I'll link in the show notes, I do have my own list I have put together that is by far the most comprehensive list I have ever been able to find of such films, and I'm adding to it all the time. I'm always doing my research and trying to find out about new films, or perhaps new to me films that are actually quite old, or at least as old as the 80s. And I'm also working on the tracking and analysis part, as well as just finding these films and getting them in a form I can watch, which can be a bit complicated. As you might imagine, some of them are hard to find. They may have never been released in the United States at all, or maybe were released in a limited fashion a very long time ago. So it's a whole thing, and it's my little passion project. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in reading or you might want to support, please consider subscribing to my and Sean's Patreon. That is the 4 Mile Circus Patreon, for as little as $2 a month. There you'll get access to the dozen or so pieces I have already shared about films like Intimate Stranger, starring Deborah Harry, or Adam Agoyan's Family Viewing, or Tamra Davis's CB4, the rap mockumentary starring Chris Rock from the 90s. All sorts of films. The Mirror Has Two Faces. Wrote about that. Wrote about all the ones you may not have heard about, like A Whisper to a Scream and Barracuda and other films about phone sex workers. Probably about 50% of them at least are horror or thriller. Some of them aren't. We'll get into it. You can, I guess, go to the Patreon if you want to hear what I have to say. As you might imagine, I've got a lot to say. But that's not all we do at the Patreon. We also have basically all of our films there that if you subscribe, you can watch without having to, rent or anything like that. There's all kinds of behind the scenes stuff and just shenanigans. We do get into shenanigans. We also have a Discord where we've been having some fun conversations with our patrons, and we like to do watch parties and hangouts and stuff like that. So if you're sad about the season ending, you can definitely catch us over there. And also be sure to tune in next week for our final full episode of the season with Johannes Grenzfurthner, Masking Threshold, Back to the Future, my co-host Sean. It's all happening. You don't want to miss it. But until then, I will leave you with this final clip, and I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday or whatever day you're listening to this. Catch you soon. Bye.
I think that's also a commonality between Back to the Future, the whole series actually, and Masking Threshold is like a core element of the whole thing is a form of kind of like social decline or like the decline of America. I mean,
Yeah.
the problem of the protagonist in Masking Threshold could have been solved with a better working social system or social healthcare system, for example. So for example, many people ask me, why did you put the film into Florida and in the United States? You could have just done it like as an Austrian character. And I said like, nah, it would not work. It would like all the stuff in the beginning of the trauma. There are more nets in a classic European kind of like social democratic system than in the US, so that it can wear out and get so bad would in that plot structure not work in Austria. It could work, but I would really have to bend reality a little bit more than in the US.
The Celluloid Mirror is a 4 Mile Circus production hosted by Nicole Solomon and Sean Mannion. Our theme music is Twisted by Kevin MacLeod. You can hear more from Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.filmmusic.io. Please take a few minutes to rate and review The Celluloid Mirror on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps other people discover the show. And if you have questions or comments about what you heard on the show or suggestions for future episodes, please do feel free to email us at info@4milecircus.com. That's INFO at the number 4 followed by the words mile, MILE, circus, CIRCUS.com. Or seek us out on social media. We are at 4 Mile Circus, same spelling, on Twitter and Instagram. Want more from the Celluloid Mirror, Sean and Nicole? Join our Patreon at patreon.com/4milecircus. You will get early access to episodes, uncut video of our recording sessions featuring parts that don't make it to the final show for most people, as well as access to our Discord server, Patreon-only events, and much, much more. To learn more about everything we do, visit us at 4milecircus.com.